next session is aptly called Weathering the Storm. It's about climate change and how it affects our cities. I won't say more, but I will invite to the podium our very own Miss Elizabeth Coach. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Carlos mentioned, this is the title of our panel is quite appropriate, and so I want to thank all of you for actually weathering the storm and being here today to listen to some really important perspectives from Chicago. I am Elizabeth Coach, as Carlos mentioned. I am director at the Energy Initiative. I'm going to call up the panel members, and I'd like to take this opportunity to make sure that they have just a couple of minutes to introduce themselves and the organizations that they are with. And then we'll go into setting the frame for the actual panel. So Commissioner Deborah Shore. Sarah Cardona. Rachel Schy, and Elena Grossman. So while they're getting settled, I'll tell you a little bit about the Energy Initiative. The Energy Initiative is a young organization here at UIC. It's only about 7 years old. And we have a very robust faculty research agenda. We have nationally recognized summer programs, both the Summer Institute on Sustainability and Energy and our Next Generation Electrochemistry Collaborative. We also have student research collaboratives, two of them that are also very young. One is 2 years old, one is just a few months old, called Beast and Cause, which are student-run collaboratives. We also have timely courses at curriculum at UIC around topics in energy and sustainability, as well as other programs that bring together thought leaders. And so I'm very thrilled to be the moderator for this panel and to talk about climate change and its impact on Chicago. So I'll start with Deborah Shore, who's the commissioner at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Elizabeth. I'm delighted to be here. 1 bus, 3 trains, and 2 hours, and happy to do it. So the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District is the agency that treats sewage and manages stormwater for virtually all of Cook County. It has a board of 9 commissioners elected at large to serve for 6-year terms. I'm one of them, and I've been on the board since late 2006. Has a $1 billion budget, just under 2,000 employees, and has a key role to play in both managing and protecting our freshwater resources. And because it manages rain in terms of stormwater and used water in terms of sewage, that's sort of 2 of the 3 pieces of our freshwater ecosystem. And we'll have a key role to play in how can we help our region become more resilient and address some of the symptoms of climate change, which are the more intense rainstorms we've been experiencing.
Great, thank you so much, Commissioner Shore. Sarah?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, everybody. Perfect title for the day. I want to say that as well, Weathering the Storm. Really happy to be here. I'm Sarah Cardona. I work at the Metropolitan Planning Council, managing our stormwater program. And I have an undergraduate in political science from the University of Colgate, and my master's in environmental policy from University of Maryland School of Public Policy. I'm a Chicago native, but I have lived in New York, Spain, and most recently in Washington, D.C. Working at the World Bank in their climate change practice. So this topic today is really near and dear to my heart, and I'm really excited to share a little bit more about the work that we do at the intersection of urban planning and policy and climate change at the Metropolitan Planning Council.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. Rachel Schy?
Hi, thanks, Elizabeth. My name is Rachel Schy. I'm the Research and Innovation Director at Elevate Energy. Elevate Energy is a Chicago-based mission nonprofit. We're actually just 2 blocks south of here. We design and implement energy efficiency and renewable energy programs that have a triple bottom line. We reduce costs, protect people and the environment, and people I think is a key note here, and ensure the benefits of energy efficiency and clean energy reach those who need them the most. My background, I'm a MUP, and I'm really thankful for my education from urban planning, and I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Elena Grossman.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. This is actually the second time where I've been a presenter and had to weather the storm. The last one was when it was pouring back in October. So second time, 2 buses and a train, hour and a half. So I'm the project manager for Building Resilience Against Climate Effects. BRACE is the acronym, and we're actually housed within the UIC School of Public Health, about a mile or so west of here. And we are CDC funded, and we work closely with the Illinois Department of Public Health to essentially help prepare the state to be able to better address the health effects from climate change.
Great. Thank you all for setting the stage for us. Now I want to make sure we set the stage for the conversation. So as many of you know, because you've been in Chicago, there has been an increase in weather events here. We're seeing one of them right now, and including floods, heat, drought, and cities around the world are also facing these similar challenges. So what I'd like for us today is to imagine Chicago as a resilient city in the Midwest, one that is stronger, smarter, and safer. In order for that to happen, we need to talk about resiliency across a couple of different areas. One is infrastructure. So how do we protect the city and its inhabitants? Another one is strategies. So how do we ensure integrated stakeholder approaches? And the last one, I think, is also communities. So how do we strengthen shared values and equitable capacities? So I want us to frame our thoughts around that today, this afternoon, as we think about how do we plan for the future. You know, Chicago has the On2 2050 strategy, and so let's talk about how Chicago's region can weather the storms today, the ones to come by 2050 and even beyond. So for the first question, I'd like all of you, since we now know your organizations and your perspectives, so from your own professional lens, how does the work you do impact climate change challenges that Chicago is facing now, and how are those climate impacts really playing out in the Chicago area? So I'd like to put that out to our panel, and I'm welcome you to respond.
So there have been at least 2 what are called 100-year storms in the last decade in Chicago. And that doesn't mean that a storm will happen only once every 100 years, but that there's 1 chance in 100 of it happening every year. And these more intense rainstorms, less predictable, more localized, are happening more often. And they overwhelm the capacity of our local sewers, our infrastructure, to capture and convey that water into larger storm sewers, into our tunnel and reservoir system. And so we're experiencing basement backups and flooding throughout the region. And we live in a low-lying, flat area. There's no downhill to pump water away from us. So the challenge for us is how to, in my word, peel back some of that concrete skin that we've laid over the landscape. By some estimates, 42% of Cook County is impervious surface. It's the built landscape and roads and parking lots and homes and driveways and so on. So how do we give more of the landscape a chance to absorb water? And that's a marriage of both gray infrastructure, pipes and detention basins and so on, and green roofs and vegetated ditches and rain gardens and so on. But it may also mean we're going to have to change our expectations that our basements may take on water periodically. They used to. We didn't have finished basements all the time. And work in every residential plot, every corporate campus, every church parking lot to try to make our region more absorbing of the water that's coming.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the Metropolitan Planning Council so that you know where my answer is coming from. We're an 84-year-old urban planning and policy nonprofit here for the greater Chicago region, working on hoping to create a more equitable, sustainable, and prosperous region. And so for us, that region footprint is City of Chicago, downtown here, but beyond that, the greater region of actually northeastern Illinois. And so looking at the climate impacts at that geographic scale, it's very similar to what Commissioner Shore just said. Have already seen specific events, and the projections are showing that we'll see even greater changes in both that precipitation and the temperature. So if you remember 2013, that was a record-breaking presidential declared flood disaster. 2008, 2010, all these storms that we all probably remember. And also on that temperature increase, 2012 was also a record breaker for the most consecutive days over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, looking at it at the wider northeastern Illinois region even, we're seeing that plays out in chronic urban flooding, as was already mentioned, and even our risk of drought, which those two sound contradictory, but I'll speak a little bit both to those and what the Metropolitan Planning Council works on in those aspects. So urban flooding challenges, as was noted, we live in a concrete jungle, and we've been adding to that over and over again over the decades. And so the rain really has nowhere else to go. And coupled with that, we do have our great infrastructure systems in some communities that are over 150 years old or weren't perhaps designed for managing the type of wet weather events. So it's wet. It's even what today would count, right, as that snow begins to melt. These infrastructure systems aren't designed to withstand what we're seeing today, let alone what we think we're going to see in the future. So it's not the rain's fault per se, but those challenges that we face here on the ground. And so that is why MPC works from a robust stormwater management program to work with partners like MWRD and others to help communities really deal with their gray and their green infrastructure. So on the gray infrastructure side, we're seeing our work on more research and even technical assistance to help those communities really plan for better stormwater management so that they can fund and update their outdated infrastructure systems or invest in brand new ones. On the green infrastructure side, we work a lot on policy solutions and even innovative solutions like harnessing market forces, for example, to really help see that increase in acceleration of these types of practices in the ground that really can help either absorb the rainwater or detain them for a while to really allow MWRD's system to do its job and just slowly release that water a little bit slower back into the system. And then really briefly about that drought risk that we've been talking about for a while here throughout the state of Illinois, but definitely in northeastern Illinois. But I think a lot of folks who might live or work in downtown Chicago don't realize that about 20 to 30% of the communities, including those in the outer ring suburbs of Chicago, they're getting their drinking water from not Lake Michigan, from different types of aquifers, deep aquifers, other types of drinking water sources. And from a 2015 study by the Illinois State Water Survey, that was 2015, but it did say that some of those communities could be facing unusable wells in 15 years. So we're not recharging that water fast enough, and it's not getting there because it's being run off through the concrete jungle and into our local water bodies and then exiting the region. So again, MPC works very concertedly in a robust water supply or drinking water program to help communities face that challenge as well, exacerbated by climate change.
Great, thank you so much.
Great. So from my professional lens, Elevate Energy has done a lot of work to reduce energy demand and to reduce the effects of climate change by reducing the amount of energy that is consumed. Now, we can say that Chicago region, just as from where we are, they've always been extremes, right? We've got hot, humid summers and cold winters. So from a climate resiliency, the way that our homes and communities have been built over the last 100 years, it allows us to have a little bit of that kind of cushion that other places may not have. So, and our houses are smaller, and they have been standing. They're not built. They've stood for 100 years. So, from a climate perspective, we know that the majority of greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings, and because we have such good transit infrastructure and this amazing drinking water source, that we're well situated as a region to become more resilient. Elevate Energy's work really addresses the impacts of energy use and energy reduction head on. We work at multiple scales. We design and implement, there's about 100 of us, and we design and implement energy efficiency programs that are electricity reduction programs that have about 40,000 customers across the state. We do direct services for building owners and renters to upgrade their buildings so that they are more energy efficient. We've retrofitted about 35,000 units of affordable housing just in the Chicago region alone. That's avoided 65,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions and has created 600 local jobs. I think that what's needed in the Chicago region, what we're already seeing, is really good leadership, and we're going to need that even more so at a city level, county level, regional level, in the absence of comprehensive federal policy. We're seeing that the actions that the local communities are taking are the ones that are going to be most impactful and most needed at this time. From the Chicago Climate Action Plan to the Climate Change is Real website that the city is hosting. There are a lot of opportunities. Illinois, specifically, at the end of 2016, passed what has been declared the best climate bill in the nation. I mean, and this is 2016, when everything was falling apart. So there's a lot of initiatives that are going on that are going to make the Chicago region more resilient.
Great, thank you so much. Elena?
So in Rachel's introduction, she said that the emphasis was really on people and really making sure that we think about people. And from my perspective, I work in public health, and it's about people. And we were asked to provide a picture, and I provided two different pictures which illustrate the two drastic weather conditions that we are seeing in heat and flooding. And there's an image from the 1995 Chicago heat wave of a mass grave. It literally looks like a picture from a civil war, where there are a bunch of coffins in a dugout area, and there's a father and son looking at rows and rows of coffins. And according to the National Climate Assessment, heat waves are actually supposed to be similar to the calamity of the 95 Chicago heat wave. So at minimum, we're going to see 700 people die from heat waves. And then on the flip side, there was a couple that we met, Pam and Tony Monsky, from a little outside of the Chicago area, whose home was destroyed in the 2013 floods. Their deductible doubled, they lost a lot of personal items, and it was extremely stressful. So from my lens, we're thinking about the people, and we're thinking about more, and some of the health effects are very direct, like more heat-related illness and heat stroke, heat rash, heat syncope. But then there are the less obvious ones, like more vector-borne diseases and how that's related, and it's a little more complicated, but we're expected to see more Lyme disease and West Nile virus in at least the in the Chicago area. Worsening respiratory health conditions. all of the public health implications from floods, which range from mold, so respiratory health, to mental health because of the financial and psychological trauma of having to go through that process, potential injuries and deaths from preparing, during, and cleaning up after the event. And so we're really seeing this wide range of health effects, and these health effects aren't necessarily new. There's the Zika virus, which was new, and people have been talking about the connection of how that might become more exacerbated because of climate change in Illinois. That's not as big of a concern as it is for Florida, Texas, and California. But all of these health effects we are seeing, and they will be exacerbated. And those with chronic respiratory health problems will experience worse problems. Heat-related illness will see more. We will see more problems from floods, as they have discussed. So we really focus on making sure that this issue is about people, and it's not about polar bears, and it's not about glaciers, and it's not about Al Gore. So we've done a variety of activities to try to help local communities and the state be better prepared for these health effects. So we've put together a heat toolkit for local health departments to essentially plug and play when there's a heat wave in their jurisdiction. We've provided mini grants to a handful of local health departments to provide technical assistance in their process in figuring out what are the health problems of most concern in their area, what are strategies to address it, and then how to go about doing that. We've provided a lot of educational opportunities, both for the general public, for public health professionals, and even for physicians in building their awareness. We're doing a lot of connecting dots of, yes, this problem is connected to health, and this is what you can do about it.
Great, thank you all. It's actually a good segue into my next thought, which was to focus on the resilient communities a little bit and to think about the people, right? So climate change has certainly displaced globally people from their homes and their countries. And so, and they're forced to seek refuge elsewhere. And, how do we track that information? How is that, is that something that we should be looking at? And is this a phenomenon that's removed from our daily lives here in Chicago or just in general in this country? And so I'd like to pose the question to you all is, which communities of ours are most impacted by climate change, so here in the Chicago area, and how are we responding to our own climate refugees? So, go ahead.
I guess, sure. I'll go ahead and start on that. To say that, a close partner of ours that we work with is CMAP, our Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. So all of you planning students in the room know that's our regional MPO here. And so we've presented a lot on this very issue and then the nexus of that and the work that our respective agencies do in stormwater planning. So they had actually done a recent analysis kind of overlaying our census tracts here for Cook County with then looking at low-income communities, where are those in the census tracts, overlaying census tracts of where are their minority populations, maybe lower English proficiency census tracts, and kind of layering on top, as you can imagine, this GIS map being built as I'm talking, right? And then overlaying where have we seen federal dollars go to flood disaster relief for folks that are claiming flood damages. And if you overlay all of those, I know we don't have that map, but if you just bring up Cook County in your mind, you're seeing vulnerability on top of vulnerability for our south and southwest side communities here in Chicago and in Cook County, right, suburban Chicago. And so for the Metropolitan Planning Council, my organization, that equates to our work on stormwater, specifically in the Calumet region, which is precisely that South Chicago, within the city of Chicago boundaries, but also 37 other suburban municipalities, all on our south, southwest, southeast side of our region here. And we facilitate the Calumet Stormwater Collaborative, which brings together then a whole diverse group of stakeholders that are working on the ground in the Calumet region to try to better coordinate, better share resources, and really solve those chronic urban flooding challenges, just exacerbating the level of vulnerability that those same communities are facing, even from disinvestment in their neighborhoods or a lack of their municipal government's ability to fundraise, to plan, or to deploy the resources necessary to tackle the issues. So I'll stop there and let other folks talk, and I can always chime in and talk about the Calumet Stormwater Collaborative later.
So I'm going to throw in another layer, and that's health data. And you'll see that the same communities have the highest asthma prevalence. From the 95 Chicago heat wave, the mortality rates were highest in the same communities. So again, it's just this exacerbation of how climate change will, it highlights the most vulnerable communities that are already vulnerable.
Yeah, I would like to jump in on that too. We talk a lot about energy equity and energy burden. And there's kind of a rule of thumb that 6% of income should go towards energy costs. And there's some debate around that number. And so there's two pieces to that equation. There's income and then there's use. So certainly tactics that are addressing the income are absolutely necessary, but also the energy use. And there are many, many families and communities whose energy burden is 15, 16, 30%, which will never be affordable. And as you mentioned, these same communities, it's the volatility, right? So they see things like the polar vortex. You see where costs just go astronomical. That's going to continue happening. And so kind of what are some strategies that really can help protect the vulnerability? The energy industry is at a point of disruption, particularly with electricity. Solar is a game changer, and we look at the infrastructure that the grid is based on. We're at a point in time where we could equip communities that have had disinvestment in the clean in historically, and we can change that trajectory. But we have to do things differently. You mentioned who gets the investments. Typically, 60% of households that are currently accessing clean energy tax credits are coming from the top income quintile. So we need both access and opportunity, but then we also need community voices at the table, so that they've taken coal-fired power plants out of the communities. These are the communities that are going to have to get onto solar more quickly, and those communities first.
Great.
So some nifty and heartening things are happening on the ground, and one quick example is the village of Robbins that the Metropolitan Planning Council and UIC, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, the Water Reclamation District and a host of other partners have developed a plan to protect the village against 100-year storms, and will take 160 acres out of the floodplain and develop what they call the Robbins Vision. But 26 of those will be dedicated to transit-oriented development, 26 acres, some new residential development, potential to create many jobs in retail and clean energy power stations. And this was developed with community input. Nobody is going to be relocated, but it's using a need to develop stormwater protection to create recreation and a whole new vision for the community, and use that as an engine for investment. The Army is going to use this as training for the troops to do earth moving and get some neat investment that way. So there's an opportunity to work with communities, bring resources to bear, and help them become more resilient.
Great.
I just have one other thought that I wanted to mention, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the book, An Autopsy of a Natural Disaster, which was Eric Kleinenberg's book on the 1995 Chicago heat wave. And it really points to the power of social capital and building community and all of these. There's a lot of how you literally build a community that can help build social capital, which is critical in being resilient. So it's just a great outcome to include when measuring these projects because it's a very powerful component in building resiliency.
Great, thank you all. I want to make sure that I leave time for questions from the audience as well. So we'll go ahead and see if the audience has any questions before I move on.
I just have a very quick question. So for when you mentioned that 6% of income should go to energy, does this include energy for fueling vehicles?
Yeah. That's for energy costs.
Just for the home?
Correct. And that's a max. I mean, there are places that are saying, you know what, we need to cut it to 3%. And strategies to do that.
You mentioned the south side, and particularly Calumet, the Avenue of Calumet Park, or South Chicago. As a native from South Chicago, I wanted to ask, what is something that we, probably the people of that community, can do to help benefit stormwater and both benefit our community in terms of your guys' helping us as well?
Sure. Thanks for that really inspiring question, because I think we can all play a part in this, and so it's great to hear that that's home for you. And so I would say a couple things that you can do is reach out to your alderman or alderwoman. We work a lot on some of these issues with Alderman Garza, for example, in that geography. Ask them where are their priorities on this? What are they currently working on? And to get a sense of where their thoughts are around their office and where they're going to put their priority towards stormwater. And then if that's not on the radar, you're bringing forth that issue that you care about, that you think that as a community you should be facing, and they can hear that directly from you. I would say that another thing that you can do is talk to any of your other nonprofits in the region that are perhaps even a member of our Calumet Stormwater Collaborative, because one of the things that we're hearing time and again from our partner organizations is that there is this gap in communicating back to residents like you. Why should we even care about stormwater management? What is green infrastructure? A lot of this stuff takes place literally under the ground. Our gray infrastructure we don't even see many times. And so if you want to be that spokesperson speaking on behalf of or connecting back out to your fellow residents about this issue, stormwater 101 and green infrastructure, why should we care and support this? I think speaking from an NGO, I think any of us would really welcome a resident champion who could help speak that language to your fellow neighbors in the community.
We have more questions?
Not to be entirely self-serving, but somebody mentioned local leaders. There's elections coming up. The work on climate change is being done in cities, counties, regions, and states. Our agency, at my initiative, adopted a resolution that we will pledge to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. Be informing yourselves, ask at forums about climate change, let candidates and elected officials know that this matters to you, because this is the overarching issue of our time.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's.
I knew we had to know. Go ahead.
Do you have time for the question?
Yes.
My name's Arnold. So one of the issues that I've been seeing in a number of projects recently is what happens when these underground streams are being overrun with stormwater, as well as being overrunning the channels that were created for them back 60 years ago, and are now floodplains that are causing hazards on the land that surrounds them. What are some of the ways that WWRD or other agencies around this region using in order to address some of those concerns?
Our agency commissioned 6 detailed watershed plans some years ago looking at Cook County, and I asked our executive director, and we estimate that roughly 90,000 homes are in the floodplain. And not all of them were when they were built, because of upstream development is now changing the way water is moving across the landscape. We are doing buyouts of some homes in partnership with municipalities and the Illinois Emergency Management Association. But everything we can do to capture water where it falls, slow the flow into the sewers, or let it evaporate or infiltrate is what we need to do. We've been looking at a distributed network of rain capture systems. Imagine a 2,000-gallon cistern connected or designed as a bench around your property or as a cistern below ground or next to your home that would capture rain off your roof and release it into the environment after a storm, because no longer will we be able to build these huge centralized holes in the ground or deep tunnels. We have to look at how to distribute capture systems throughout the region and throughout our neighborhoods.
Great. Thank you. It's interesting because the distributed water network is similar to what's happening in the energy area as well. And it's certainly a good way to address the large challenges that we face in this area and across communities. And they're very different communities as well. So it certainly is an alternative to what we've seen. So any other questions from the audience? I just want to make sure we don't run out of time there, because then I'd like to continue with some of the questions that I still have for all of you, because you've each brought up your individual lenses from your professional and the organizations, how you're working toward it. Sitting here, the 4 of you, I'm just wondering how much cross-collaboration is there going on now, and how much can there possibly be after this panel?
Great.
Well, there needs to be more. There is some. One of the things I learned from Elena that I think is so important, talking about people, is that people in the public health realm, nurses especially, but also physicians, are trusted messengers about some of the symptoms and effects of climate change. And so we need to build on that and bring them into all of our spheres.
Something that we've been trying to do, and I can't say that we've entirely done it yet, but including the health message into planning. It's not just the health benefits of mitigating floods, but by providing more green space, you're encouraging more physical activity, which helps reduce obesity and diabetes. By having more green space and trees, it helps reduce asthmatic exacerbations. So there's a lot of benefits. We're actually, one of our local health departments that has a mini grant is actually working on building a database of wells. So it's in Kendall County. So they have I'm not sure what percentage of their population uses wells for drinking water, but they are working on creating a database of mapping wells that are susceptible to both droughts and floods. And they're going to take that information to the zoning and planning committee in their county. And so that's the type of cross-collaboration that can really be effective, at least with the health and planning communities.
Yeah, I would jump on that too. I mean, there is a lot of collaboration. We've worked with each of you on issues that span energy, health, water, both from affordability, equality, and access standpoint. One of the projects that I'm really excited on is a HUD-funded project from the Office of Lead, in which we are testing ventilation systems, multiple ventilation systems in households with families with asthma. And I think that that type of work, and we've seen some success with green and healthy housing, but I think it's really important as planners to really push for more cross-industry collaboration. I mean, the issues are not siloed, get this, right? And our industries tend to be siloed. So it's really, I think, important for us as planners to reach out to each other and to figure out ways, how do you layer financing so that a home that is going through flooding or lead remediation or energy efficiency can basically access those services comprehensively. It kills us. It kills us when we have to walk away from a family that needs energy efficiency because they have a hole in their roof. You just really need to address the health and safety issues. And I think as planners, we have a really key role in figuring out how to leverage foundations, government, and other market corporate sources in order to address these issues comprehensively.
Great. Thank you very much, all of you. I think we are out of time, and so thank you all for joining us today for this timely and really needed conversation. And so hopefully we'll continue that conversation past today as well. Thank you.
Thank you.